Yes, we are talking about God's most cursed creation again, the Kuznetsov. You all requested this with your super chats, and so I'm delivering. Today, we are going to be learning about the engines that power the beast, why they constantly break, and why this cursed SCP character can never travel anywhere without a tugboat on hand. Well, why it couldn't in the past. These days it can't move at all for various reasons, not limited to the fact the Russian Navy dropped a crane on it and keeps setting it on fire on accident. Welcome back, and thank you all for your bullying to make this video, and remember to hype, like, comment, and subscribe so people can actually see it. The hype thing is only available to some people, so if you can't see it, just YouTube things. The cursed machine known as Kuznetsov was, as you all know by now, laid down in 1982 at the Nikolaev South shipyards in the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. Now, what's important to know here is that this is the only facility in the Soviet Union and former Soviet Union capable of building aircraft carriers of this size and maintaining them. That second bit, maintaining them, is extra important. See, Kuznetsov was, at the end of the day, a massive operation in compromises because the Soviets had extensive experience with naval nuclear reactors, and they were working on large carrier plans that would eventually become the Ulyanovsk class, ordered in 1986 with them, but due to limited facilities, due to limited time, and extremely limited budgets, they made the Kuznetsov. See, the Kirov-class cruisers, they were floating around at the time, and they were using reactor power, and the Soviet Navy had plenty of submarines that also ran on energy, but, and here is the big but, it's the 1980s. And the USSR in the 1980s is completely broke. It is on its knees with stagnation and misery and sadness. And that's why we're about to go into what we go into now. In order to meet the required timeline, which was really pushed forward for the Kuznetsov class, the USSR would design the ship to use 8 turbo-pressurized boilers feeding 4 GTZA674 steam turbines. Now, some sources list these engines as TV-12 full-geared turbines, and honestly, I have seen equal number of sources saying both, so make of that what you will. Could be a simple translation thing, but either way, the engines produce 50,000 shaft horsepower each, and the 4 turbines together deliver a combined output of 200,000 shaft horsepower, driving 4 shafts fitted with 5-bladed bronze pitch propellers. Each propeller is 4.26 meters in diameter. On paper, this is a substantial and capable power plant. The boilers operate at a steam pressure of 66 kilograms per square centimeter, and they produce 115 tons of steam per hour, which is a significant increase over the 98 tons per hour of the preceding Kiev class that used a similar plant. The carrier's design top speed is 29 knots, and its range at 29 knots would be 3,800 nautical miles. That's provided she's operating at full chat the entire time. Say, for example, if she was being rushed into the North Sea to stand up against a British carrier group that was there hunting submarines. But for longer deployments at more economical cruising speeds of 18 knots, the range balloons out to about 8,500 nautical miles, and on paper, this is generally well in line with contemporary ships of the size and role. On paper. One crucial thing to note here, though, is that there are no auxiliary boilers in this design. Nada. No redundancy at all. Electrical power is supplied by 9 turbo generators producing a combined 2,011 kilowatts, and this is supplemented by 6 diesel generators of similar output. The idea was that they would only be turned on while the ship was deployed at sea, and this would preserve their longevity and allow the carrier to operate for a significant period of time. Again, see on paper, this power plant sounds great, right? A simple, design, rugged, proven technology. Already operating on the existing Kiev-class carriers, and there are 4 of them. It's just made a bit bigger. It all should be fine, right? Well, not when you consider what actually goes into the engines as fuel. If there was a tier list of fossil fuels, Mazut would sit literally on the bottom. I'm not exaggerating, it is exactly what remains in a refinery's distillation column after everything useful has been extracted on the bottom of the barrel. But petrol, jet fuel, diesel, kerosene, all the good stuff, it's all ripped out and it leaves a residue of thick, dark, sulphurous sludge that smells foul, solidifies in cold weather, and poisons the air when it's burned. That is Mazut. And that's what the Kuznetov runs on. And yes, you're about to listen to what Mazut is for about 10 minutes. Mazut is talked about a lot when we bring up the Kuznetsov, but no one I find really goes into it too much as to what it is. See, Mazut is a heavy fuel oil. It's classified in Russia and the Commonwealth of Independent States, or CIS, under the commercial grade designation Mazut 100. It contains heavy hydrocarbons, asphaltanes, petroleum resins, paraffins, and both saturated and unsaturated cyclic and polycyclic hydrocarbons. It carries significant concentrations of sulfur compounds, nitrogen, and heavy metals such as vanadium, nickel, and iron. These metal and sulfur impurities are not just sort of leftover contaminants, they are structurally embedded in the hydrocarbon molecules that themselves make up what Mazut is. Which is why when you spill the crap, it's so hard to clean up environmentally. This will come up later. The defining characteristic of Mazut commercially above all is its sulfur content, and the GOST grading system classifies it according to 4 tiers. Very low sulfur Mazut contains 0.5% sulfur or less, low sulfur runs from 0.5 to 1%, normal sulfur is between 1 and 2%, high sulfur contains more than 2%, and to put these figures in perspective, since 2020, the International Marine Organization, or IMO, has banned any vessel using fuel with a sulfur content above 0.5%. So that is very low sulfur Mazut, unless the vessel is filtered specifically with scrubbers. Iranian Mazut, produced from sour domestic crude production, typically carries a sulfur content of around 3.5%. which is 7 times the amount the IMO allows for ships on the open sea. I just want to point that out. Not all oil deposits are made the same. So Venezuela, Iran, Russia, Australia, Texas, rest of the United States, every oil field does produce different grades of oil. Some of them are pretty crap, to be honest. There's just a lot of it. Mazut's physical properties are difficult to deal with too if you're, trying to clean it up or use it or even just burn it. It's extremely thick at room temperature and typically it needs to be preheated before you can even pump it, let alone use it or burn it. For shipping purposes, it requires specialized tanks fitted with internal heating coils to maintain the cargo at a pumpable temperature, and this is around 25 degrees, because below 25 degrees Celsius, that is, Mazut begins to solidify firstly into a thick paste and then it turns into like a mudslidey sort of thick shake sludge. The closest Western equivalent to Mazut is bunker C, also known as number 6 fuel oil. Both are refinery residuals with high viscosity and high sulfur content, and both are primarily used in large industrial boilers and ship engines where heavy fuels can be burned at a high temperature with sufficient equipment. But Mazut is generally produced from a lower grade oil feedstock than bunker C. Like I said, not all oil is the same, and that makes Mazut dirtier, heavier, more sulfurous, and less amenable to processing. In short, it's beyond crap, and nobody uses it for a reason unless they can't help it. The horrific sludge of doom, as it were, is produced primarily in post-Soviet republics and Iran. And, well, really, it's Iran and Russia. They're the main two. The production and export of Mazut is tightly controlled. See, very low sulfur Mazut is particularly constrained, and refineries capable of producing it generally are owned by the largest domestic oil companies, which themselves are largely state-run entities. A minimum of 50% of the total produced volume is reserved for domestic consumption within Russia and the Commonwealth of Independent States. Much of the remainder is allocated through state quotas to state-controlled entities abroad, with any residual export volumes being sold at state auctions accessible only to the Russian domestic market, specifically Russian domestic companies that have the Tsar's favour. Despite the fact that it's quite literally the bottom of the barrel when it comes to fuel, it does have some uses, particularly in warm areas, mostly because above all it's dirt cheap compared to other fuel sources, which means that it can be used in electricity generation within large thermal power plants, industrial heating, in steel mills, cement factories, and other petrochemical facilities. In the former USSR and parts of the Far East, aka Siberia, Mazut also functions as a heating oil for district heating system networks that supply heat to entire city blocks or residential complexes. And this is by design because generally speaking they date back to the Soviet Union, and yes, these cities stink, and you can smell it. I've been in a city that's been heated by Mazut before, it smells like crap. So, in case you haven't picked it, this fuel is terrible, which is why North American and Western European environmental regulations have banned it from most usage, and it's cheap. The big thing about Mazut though, and what makes it so bad, is what happens when it actually leaks into the environment. See, if Mazut goes into the water, it doesn't remain on the surface, it solidifies and sinks, and then it gets to the bottom. It can't be chemically fixed up once it gets to the bottom, you can't clean it up like a normal oil spill once it touches the bottom, and then it contaminates the sediments on the bottom of the ocean, enters the food chain through organisms like mussels and oysters who are then eaten by other fish and sea creatures, and so they get full of Mazut, and it just hangs around for years and decades. And then as water temperatures begin to rise with currents in spring and summer months, the sunken Mazut then warms up, breaks down a bit, and spreads out like a thick oil slick, grabbing everything in its path before solidifying, dragging it all to the bottom and repeating the process. Long story short, Mazut endures not because it is good, but because it is cheap and because Russia is poor. It is a quick fix to a big energy problem, and it destroys everything it touches over time. The smog alone caused by burning Mazut is deadly. For example, in Iran, there are tens of thousands of premature deaths every year, in children particularly, who are hospitalized with respiratory infections. That number surges, particularly in cities where schools are closed during the winter because the air outside is classified as hazardous for the population due to burning Mazut. And this is what the Russian Navy put inside the Kuznetov because, again, it's cheaper. The Kuznetsov's propulsion troubles aren't just because of Mazut though, because geography does actually play a really big role here. When the USSR fell, one thing that is so often lost on people is the fact that Ukraine was responsible for, in some cases, and in some industries, up to over half of all production in the entire Union. The Nikolaev South shipyard, where the carrier was built, was in the Ukrainian SSR. The machinery manufacturers, components and suppliers, and engineering specialists who designed and built the boilers, the turbines, and all the other important stuff for the carrier were concentrated around this shipyard in Ukraine, as well as other Soviet republics, and they all became independent in 1991 when the Soviet Union dissolved. Russia would inherit the Kuznetsov by stealing it, that's a topic for another video, and they sailed it straight to Murmansk, but they had absolutely nothing built to support the damn thing. The specialised expertise required to manufacture the replacement boiler components to correct the tolerances, to, figure out what was going wrong in the steam plant, and to actually fix the damn thing required all of the facilities that were now located in a foreign country that Russia decided it would be a great idea to progressively bully and try and steal its land. The original manufacturers would naturally therefore respond to the Russians if they asked for help with the Kuznetsov by telling them to bugger off, and also by selling the Kuznetsov sister ship Varyag to the Chinese, but we will get to that ship shortly. But it's not just about running the ship at sea, because when you have a ship that large and no facilities, you can't just switch it off at the dock. It has to remain in idle, using its boilers and generators and wearing itself out at the dock through burning that terrible fuel oil. And so even though Kuznetsov has only sailed a half dozen times, in reality, it has been running non-stop for decades, again, up until the incident of a thumping crane smacking into its deck, but that's a whole other thing. Now we get to the actual operational history of the Kuznetsov, which for lack of a better description is somewhere between tragic, an eldritch horror story, and hilarious for all the wrong reasons. On the 7th of January 2009, a small fire would actually break out while she was off the coast of Turkey. This fire was caused by a short circuit in the ship's electrics that had been run ragged, and it killed at least one crewman. The very next month, she was involved in a large oil spill, along with other Russian naval vessels while refueling off the south coast of Ireland, and yes, this dumped Mazut straight into the ocean and caused a massive international incident. During its 2012 deployment to the Mediterranean, the carrier lost propulsion entirely in the Bay of Biscay during the return voyage and had to be taken under tow. Mind you, this is marginally better than the first deployment to the Med in the 90s, when the ship lost the ability to make fresh water. Because of the fact the ship just stopped randomly, the Russian Navy began after this to deploy an ocean-going sea tug alongside the carrier as a matter of routine precaution for whenever it was at sea, just in case it decided to stop working randomly, which tells you that the crew, the government, and the Navy knew that the ship was in a state and that it was going to fail. Again, we can largely summarize that this is due to the fact the ship had spent the best part of 20 years running constantly at the dock due to a lack of facilities, which wore the engines out, and due to the fact that most of the industry in Ukraine was needed to run the thing, it couldn't be maintained properly, or wouldn't, take your pick. And so when the ship deployed to Syria in 2016, the tugboat rushed alongside to help out just in case things went to pot. The 2016 Syrian deployment, mind you, itself illustrated just how bad the power plant was too, because the ship's Mazut burning engines left a cloud of thick black smoke so visible that it turned into a meme as it transited the English Channel. It was visible for miles. They could see it inland in France and the United Kingdom. Once the carrier actually arrived in the Middle East, the ship itself couldn't actually sustain flight operations, and the missions were flown from land while the Kuznetov sat off at sea, desperately trying to, not die. After the Syrian deployment, the Kuznetov entered a refit in 2017, a place that it has never left, and what followed was a remarkable series of disasters that compound the original propulsion problems and make them look like a cakewalk. See, in October 2018, the carrier was being removed from the floating dry dock PD-50 at Brusasiko, and the dry dock began to sink due to a loss of electrical power. A large crane then fell onto the carrier's flight deck, putting a giant hole on it and making structural damage, killing one worker. The loss of the dock itself is a major problem because it's the only dry dock in Russia at the time that was capable of actually accommodating the Kuznetsov, because again, Russia never built the facilities to maintain the ship, let alone fix the power plant. In case you're wondering, the dock sank because the shipyard director had either sold the fuel to run the backup generators for a quick buck, or he had never had the fuel delivered and sold it before it even got delivered to make a quick buck. Either way, it's pretty bad. In December 2019, a fire would break out on the Kuznetsov while welding work was being conducted, and at least one worker was killed while 10 were injured. The fire caused additional damage to the ship's electrical and fire protection systems that had been added to the repair list, and further compounded the propulsion issues. Another fire occurred in December 2022 as the ship was being prepared to leave the dry dock after the hull's underwater sections had been repaired, but no casualties were reported on that occasion. Throughout this period, deadlines for the completion of the refit were repeatedly announced and missed. In 2021, an announcement by Vice President of the United Shipbuilding Company set the target for the first half of 2023. By 2022, the target had slipped to 24. By 23, the target had slipped to 25. The refit, which was intended to actually replace the power plant, the avionics, the flight deck, and the ski jump, and all the electrical equipment, and many other things, it will never be finished. And rumor has it that Russia is preparing to just give up on the ship. Not scrap it, because that would be politically bad, and then they'd have to admit they're not a superpower because they don't have a carrier, but giving it up nonetheless. But before I end the video, I want to talk about that smoke that I mentioned before, because it's probably the most striking thing about the ship. The biggest meme about the Kuznetsov is without doubt the big belching black death cloud that follows it around. Well, that followed it around. Either that or the fact that ship randomly combusts, like one of the two, take your pick. Technically, the smoke is pretty straightforward to explain. It's Mazut. This is what happens when you burn Mazut. To burn cleanly, and yes, I'm using massive air quotes here, Mazut must be atomized into a fine mist before it enters the combustion chamber of the boiler. To atomize it, you have to break it into droplets small enough to mix properly with the air, oxygen, and it then must be heated to reduce its viscosity to a pumpable and sprayable state. The heating requirements are precise. Too cold, or the fuel arrives at the burner as thick blobs that don't mix with the air and they produce an incomplete combustion and carbon particulate smoke. The boiler operators must maintain fuel temperature within a fairly narrow margin of error throughout the entire system. From the fuel tanks though, the heating coils, pumps, systems, the burner manifolds, all of it, it's all very touchy. In a well-maintained system with properly calibrated equipment, experienced sailors, and some care and attention, it's really achievable. In a system with aging pipework, defective and non-standard components, hodgepodge put together, if you believe the SCP story, sections of the ship that are too dangerous to go into, and the fact that it's been beaten to death over 3 decades of abuse and run on a shoestring budget from a navy that sold said shoestring for a few bucks, well, it's never going to work properly. On top of that, the fact that Mazut is getting worse because of the high sulfur content, because refineries keep going kaboom means it's never going to come back. But the fact that Mazut gets worse to make a quick buck because it's cheaper to make crappier Mazut, basically, It means the temperatures in the boiler exhaust system, well, they can't be regulated as well, and it leads to sulfur trioxide that can form and combine with water vapor to produce sulfuric acid mist, which in turn attacks the boiler tubes from the hot side and the exhaust system from the cold side. Managing this acid point, as I've had it explained to me by someone who knows this a lot better, and the fact that the corrosion is caused by it, it requires extremely careful control of temperature and boiler operating conditions that need to be pinpoint precise. Do you really think this thing is pinpoint precise? So yes, to give you a bit of a summary on that, the Kuznetov quite literally spits death from its funnel. Like I said, the refit from 2017 was intended, amongst other goals, to address this issue with the propulsion at their root and stem by quite literally ripping out the entire thing, replacing with new boilers and systems that were made either entirely in Russia or could be easily purchased by Russia. I'm going to take a guess here, because if I was a betting man using some process of elimination, I would wager the plan was to spend the money to outfit the ship in a similar manner to the propulsion-wise to our sister, the former Variag, Liaoning, which I'm probably saying wrong, but it's the carrier that's in the active service with the Chinese Navy, and like I said, the former sister of the Kuznetsov, Variag, that was towed over. As at the time of recording, that ship operates incredibly well. It has no major issues, at least none that reached the news, and as of late June 2026, it just completed a deployment with the Chinese Navy and returned to Qingdao without incident. It acts as a training vessel for the future Chinese carrier wing. Meanwhile, as of 2025, the Kuznetsov remains out of service, and in September 2024, an open-source intelligence analyst revealed that the carrier's crew of approximately 1,500 sailors had actually been reassigned to combat units engaged in the Russo-Ukrainian war. And I have asked around a bit, and I can confirm that that unit is most likely to have been engaged in operations, although I do not know the status of, numbers or anything like that. By July 2025, reports emerged that repair and modernization work has been totally suspended. It's likely the vessel will be just left in place, because if Russia actually decommissions it, it becomes the only member of the UN Security Council, the only permanent member, without an operational aircraft carrier, which is politically no bueno for a country obsessed with saving face. Imagine that, Russia being outnumbered 2-1 or 2-0 by a British carrier force compared to its own. It's not something they could really handle. I can somewhat imagine a world where they go to China cap in hand and offer to purchase the former Variag at way over valued price from the Chinese Navy, and I can somewhat see China possibly selling it in future because they are currently themselves pivoting away from ski jump carriers with the newest carrier Fujian and the current carrier under construction, which we don't know the name of yet, not including a ski jump, which leaves the Chinese carrier along with her half-sister Shandong as outliers in the Chinese carrier fleet compared to the newer designs which are all using catapults instead of ski jumps. So there is a theoretical world where Russia does try and buy it. How they're going to afford it, given what's happening to them right now, well, that's a whole other kettle of fish to go into. Maybe they could trade some islands or a bit of former outer Manchuria for it, who knows, but it's a whole other kettle of fish. Fundamentally though, the Kuznetsov's propulsion system was never going to end well. The Soviet industrial chain that designed and built it was dying, and it's gone now. It's completely gone, which is why the Baku, operated by the Indian Navy as Vikramaditya, saw a significant refit before they bought the ship. Well, more accurately, before Russia ripped them off refitting it. I talked about that in my other Kuznetsov video. Long story short, the Kuznetsov is dead. It's never coming back. No matter how much we all want our favourite lolcow to return, it never will. At least we have the cute little Thai aircraft carrier to look at, but it doesn't randomly catch fire, so, it's actually kind of competent. Fun to look at though, it's basically a royal yacht now. Thank you all for coming to what was a bonus video this month that you all funded with your super chats. I believe you all put in something like $200 worth of super chats to get this, so again, can't thank you enough. It was pretty incredible. I hope you all enjoyed it. Like, comment, subscribe, and please remember to hype the video if you can. Every little bit helps the channel. Because, we're going for a sub goal. We're going to try and hit 175,000 by the end of the year. I don't know if it's possible at all, but I'll figure out something if we do.